The air inside the lobby of St. Jude's private surgical center doesn't just smell like antiseptic, it smells like high-yield debt and unshakable confidence. It is a sterile, cathedral-like space of brushed steel and Carrara marble, designed to remind you that health is a luxury and you are currently trespassing on its grounds. I stood in the center of the atrium, wearing a charcoal wool coat that had seen 3 different time zones in 48 hours, and boots that still carried a faint dusting of salt from the sidewalk. To the casual observer, to the people behind the mahogany reception desk, I looked like a glitch in the software. I looked like an uninsured wanderer, a term I knew they used in internal memos to describe the human debris that occasionally drifted in from the public transit line 3 blocks away. I checked my watch, 8:14 a.m. The audit wasn't scheduled to begin until 9, but in my line of work, the most honest data is gathered in the silence before the storm. "Can I help you, sir?" The voice belonged to Marcus Thorne. I didn't need to see his badge to know who he was. He was the Chief of Patient Relations, a title that in this specific ecosystem functioned more like a head of border security. He was lean, dressed in a suit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and wore the expression of a man who had just smelled something rotting in his humidor. "I'm here regarding a filing," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the frantic energy they expected from the desperate. "I need to speak with the administrator regarding the Section 402 compliance headers." Thorne didn't even blink. He didn't look at the leather folio tucked under my arm. He looked at my boots. Then he looked at the security guard standing near the elevators, a man whose physical dimensions suggested he was recruited primarily for his ability to move heavy objects without asking questions. "The billing department handles disputes for the indigent on Tuesdays," Thorne said, his tone dripping with a practiced liquid condescension. "And they do so at the annex across the street. This floor is reserved for active surgical consultations. We have ambassadors from the Ministry of Health arriving in 40 minutes, and I don't have the luxury of debating policy with a walk-in." "I'm not a dispute," I replied, watching the way his pupils dilated. "I'm a variable, and I'd suggest you check your internal directory for the regional oversight liaison before you finish that sentence." Thorne let out a short, sharp laugh, the kind of sound a predator makes when it finds a particularly delusional piece of prey. He stepped closer, invading my personal space just enough to assert dominance without looking like he was trying. "Let's be very clear," he whispered, his voice low and jagged. "You are an uninsured wanderer who found an open door. You've read a few buzzwords on a forum and think you found a loophole. But here is the reality. This facility operates on a level of prestige you couldn't calculate if I gave you the slide rule. My staff is currently prepping for a Tier 1 certification. I am not going to let a man who looks like he slept in a terminal ruin my morning. Security is going to escort you to the sidewalk. If you return, I'll have you processed for institutional interference." He signaled the guard. I felt the heavy hand on my shoulder, the dull pressure of a man who was used to moving variables like me out of the light. I didn't resist. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I looked past Thorne at the digital display behind the desk, which was cycling through the hospital's core values: integrity, precision, care. "Mr. Thorne," as the guard began to pivot me toward the revolving doors, "do you know what happens to a structure when the foundation has a higher line fracture?" Nothing. Not at first. It looks perfect. It stays white and gleaming, but the weight of the building stays the same. The pressure doesn't go away. It just waits for someone to tap the glass. Thorne turned his back on me, already dismissing my existence as he straightened his silk tie in the reflection of the marble pillar. "Get him out of here," and sanitize the chair he was sitting near. As I was pushed through the glass doors into the biting morning air, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I had exactly 36 minutes. I scrolled through the encrypted PDF on my screen. a comprehensive list of every ghost claim St. Jude's had filed in the last fiscal year, totaling $42 million in fraudulent billing. I looked at the building, a fortress of glass and eco. They thought they were clearing the trash. They didn't realize they had just put the lead auditor in the one place where he could see the back entrance and every dirty secret being wheeled through it. I sat on a concrete bench across the street, opened my folio, and began to time the arrival of the black SUVs. The hunt hadn't even started yet, and Thorne had handed me the first 3 violations on a silver platter. Thorne was still standing in the center of the atrium when the first black SUV pulled onto the curb, followed immediately by 2 more. He straightened his jacket, his face shifting from a snarl of elitism to a mask of practiced, sycophantic grace. He expected the ministry. He expected a handshake and a commemorative photo. What he got was a cold front. The doors of the SUVs opened in synchronized percussion. 6 men and women in dark, tailored overcoats stepped out. They weren't carrying gift baskets. They were carrying Pelican cases, hard-shell, waterproof containers used for transporting high-end forensic servers. Leading them was Eleanor Vance, the chief legal counsel for the National Insurance Syndicate. I had worked with Eleanor for 10 years. She was a woman who viewed corporate malfeasance with the same clinical detachment a surgeon views a tumor. I stood up from my concrete bench, brushed the salt from my coat, and walked back across the street. The security guard at the door moved to block me again, his hand going to his belt. I didn't stop. I didn't even look at him. I simply held up a red laminated card, the Tier 4 Oversight Bypass. It's a document that carries more weight than a police badge in a private medical facility. It's a total loss of sovereignty. The guard froze. He knew the color. Everyone in the industry knows that red means the crown has arrived to take back the keys. I walked through the revolving doors just as Thorne was extending his hand to Eleanor. "Miss Vance, a pleasure," Thorne purred. "We've prepared the executive suite for your review. We're fully compliant, as I'm sure your preliminary data suggests." Eleanor didn't take his hand. She didn't even look at him. She looked at me. "Is the perimeter secure?" "The back loading bay is being monitored by my remote team," I said, stepping into the circle. Mr. Thorne was kind enough to personally demonstrate the facility's patient sorting protocols for me earlier. It was enlightening. The color didn't just leave Thorne's face, it evaporated. He looked at me, then at the red card in my hand, then at the forensic team now setting up shop on his Carrara marble desks. The hierarchy didn't just tilt, it inverted so fast I could almost hear the snap of his ego. "I'm sorry," Thorne stammered, his voice jumping an octave. "There's been a massive misunderstanding. I thought, we get so many unauthorized individuals, I didn't realize you were the compliance lead." "You didn't realize I was the man who holds your charter in my left hand," I said, my voice cutting through the lobby's silence like a scalpel. "You saw a coat you didn't recognize and a person you didn't fear, and you defaulted to your true nature. That's the problem with status, Marcus. It's a localized hallucination. You thought you were the king of this lobby, but this lobby is an asset owned by a holding company, and that holding company just failed its liquidity stress test because of the $42 million in ghost claims I've been tracking for 6 months." I stepped closer until I could see the fine bead of sweat forming on his hairline. "Open the server room, now." "We need a formal notice of—" "You were served electronically the moment I touched that red card to the reader. Every computer in this building is currently being mirrored to our central hub. Your Tier 1 certification isn't happening, Marcus. What's happening is a terminal audit." The collapse was physical. Thorne's shoulders slumped. The man who had been a titan of industry 10 minutes ago now looked like a child caught in a lie. He watched as my team began unspooling fiber optic cables across his pristine floors. The polished steel and marble, the symbols of his power, now served as the backdrop for his professional execution. I pulled a tablet from my folio and tapped a few keys. Eleanor, check the billing codes for the oncology wing, specifically the uninsured patients they supposedly treated pro bono. You'll find they were actually used as shells to dump excess pharmaceutical costs from the private wing. I looked back at Thorne. You treated me like a wanderer because you thought I had no power to hurt you. But in this system, the only people you should truly fear are the ones who know how the ledger is balanced. You've been cooking the books to fund this marble, Marcus, and I'm here to turn the heat off. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the rapid-fire clicking of keyboards. The high-stakes reality of his situation was setting in. The suit, the title, and the arrogance were all predicated on a lie that had just been deconstructed in blazing daylight. "Guard," I said without looking back, "Mr. Thorne is no longer an authorized occupant of the executive floor. Please escort him to the sidewalk and sanitize the elevator buttons after he leaves." The next 2 hours were a masterclass in systemic deconstruction. As Thorne was let out, stumbling slightly as he hit the transition from marble to pavement, the atmosphere in the center changed. The frantic, high-strung energy of a prestige clinic was replaced by the low hum of a forensic laboratory. "Everyone, eyes on me," I said, my voice not raised but carrying that particular frequency of absolute authority. The nurses, the billing clerks, and the junior administrators froze. As of 9:14 a.m., the syndicate has assumed emergency conservatorship of this facility. The board of directors has been suspended. The C-suite has been locked out of the network. If you are here to practice medicine, stay at your stations. If you are here to manage revenue cycles, step away from your terminals. I spent the next 4 hours in Thorne's former office, a glass-walled aquarium overlooking the city. It was filled with status symbols, a first-edition law text, a humidor, and a collection of fountain pens that cost more than a transplant. I didn't sit in his chair. I stood at the window, watching the digital feed of the audit as it stripped the building to its bones. By noon, we had the silver folder. It was a hidden directory on the local server titled Operational Efficiency. It wasn't about medicine. It was a roadmap of human exploitation. It detailed how Thorne and his circle had systematically denied life-saving treatments to low-yield patients while inflating the bills of the high-yield elite to cover the deficit of their own embezzlement. I called for a meeting in the boardroom. The remaining department heads sat there, looking like survivors of a shipwreck. "You're destroying the most profitable center in the region." "I'm destroying a parasite," I corrected him. "Profit is a metric of business. Health is a metric of society. You've confused the two for long enough." I left the room and found Thorne sitting on the same concrete bench where I had sat earlier. He hadn't left. He couldn't. When your entire identity is a building and you're locked out of it, you become a ghost. He looked up as I approached, his silk tie loosened, his eyes hollow. "You ruined it. The prestige, the history, you burned it all for what? A point of pride?" I looked down at him, not with anger, but with the cold, analytical pity one feels for an obsolete piece of hardware. "You still don't get it, Marcus. You think I'm here because you insulted me this morning. You think this is a vendetta." I leaned in, the shadow of my coat falling over him. "I didn't burn this place down because you were rude. I burned it down because you were inefficient. You spent $40 million on marble and optics while your mortality rates in the lower wards climbed by 12%. You were a bad investment." He looked at his hands. "What do I do now?" "You do what the uninsured wanderers do," I said, turning to walk toward my waiting car. "You move on. You find a new place to exist. But I'd be careful, Marcus. I've updated the compliance headers nationwide. There isn't a ledger in this country I can't see into, and I don't like what I see in yours." As my car pulled away, I watched him in the rearview mirror, a small, dark speck against the white marble of a building that no longer knew his name. The world operates on the illusion of status, the right suit, the right floor, the right tone of voice. But status is just a coat of paint. Real power isn't the ability to walk through a door, it's the ability to decide whether the door remains on its hinges. I opened my folio and began the first-person report for the next audit. There was a private equity firm in the Midwest that was currently feeling very, very confident. I think I'll pay them a visit on Monday. I'll wear my old boots.